Good evening. Wow, it got dark. I'm Clayton Rose. I have the privilege of being the president of this college. And this is just one of the great evenings of the year. This lecture in particular, and evenings like it, where we hear from distinguished members of the larger community about issues of the day. And tonight it's the 20th Brodie Family Lecture. And for 2 decades, those of you that are following along can see that I can do the math there, because of the great generosity of the Brodie family, our education department has had the pleasure of having a speaker of great distinction in the field of education come to our campus. The Brodie Family Fund was established by the late Ted Brodie, class of 1952. Ted served as an overseer of the college from 1983 to 1995, and he saw great value in shedding light on the challenges and practices of teaching and learning. And so provided the resources and the vision for this lectureship series and what we will experience here tonight. Ted passed away in September of 2010, and we also honor him tonight for his vision and his great generosity. He was also the first in a long line of Bowdoin alumni. Tonight, 3 of his children are here with us. I can't see very well out there, but Glenn, there we are, down in the front row. Class of 76, Beth, class of 84, and Karen, 79. There's Karen, there. And Karen's daughter, Emily, class of 2009, there as well, Ted's granddaughter. And Ted's son, Mark, who was class of 87, could not be with us tonight, although he is with us here in spirit. But we are deeply grateful for your longstanding commitment, for the travels you all made to be here, and for everything that you have done for our college. So thank you, Brodie family. At least it was a Brodie that did that. This year's lecture will be delivered by Professor Gloria Ladson-Billings, and in a moment, my colleague Doris Santoro will introduce Professor Ladson-Billings. But she'll talk a bit tonight about how we can consider better ensuring that students at every level in our educational system, from pre-K through graduate studies, can experience more success in schools. And it's worth pointing out that this is work that our college, in our own way, with our mission, has been embracing for a very long time and continues to focus on in a very intense way. We seek to bring the most amazing students to Bowdoin from every background and experience out there, and to give them the opportunity to learn and to grow, and to, as President Hyde said in the offer of the college, to be leaders in all walks of life. We are only one of 18 colleges or universities in this country that is a need-blinded admission and no loan in our financial aid program, and we work to meet the demonstrated need of every family. We have for a long time had programs on this campus like our base advising group, which helps our amazing students who come from more challenged high school backgrounds to get up the curve here quickly and experience everything Bowdoin has to offer. And this year, we organized the Thrive program and have our first cohort of Jeffrey Canada Scholars on campus. And so the next chapter for Bowdoin in this journey and in this work has begun here. And it is very fitting, therefore, to have with us tonight Professor Ladson-Billings and to have her talk to us about this work and this challenge. And so with that, I invite Doris Santoro, Associate Professor of Education and Chair of the Department of Education, to introduce her.
Thank you, President Rose. I'm delighted that so many members of the Brodie family were able to join us for this 20th annual Brodie Family Lecture. And thank you, Dean McCormick, for your ongoing support of the Education Department, its students, and its programming. And thank you to all of the Bowdoin staff, including dining, housekeeping facilities, and IT, who make events like this a success. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we gather this evening on the land of the Wabanaki. So I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings to Bowdoin College. Although she and I first met in person about 2.5 hours ago, it would not be an exaggeration to say that no other single person has had as much of an influence on my teaching practice as she. I was introduced to Dr. Ladson-Billings' work while I was an undergraduate, pursuing my teaching credential as our Bowdoin teacher scholars do today. Her scholarship electrified me. It showed me that, as a white teacher, I could learn to better recognize excellence in my Black and brown students, challenge them academically, and enable them to do all of this without making the devil's bargain of selling out or losing themselves. Her work also taught me that this feat was empty if I did not simultaneously help my Black and brown students develop the skills to critically examine the socio-political conditions that made this endeavor so difficult. So today, I share what I've learned from Dr. Ladson-Billings in my career as a researcher and as a teacher educator. So thank you for that. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings is Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor in Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and was faculty affiliate in the Departments of Educational Policy Studies, Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis, and Afro-American Studies at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She is the president of the National Academy of Education, and she was the 2005 to 2006 president of the American Educational Research Association. Dr. Ladson-Billings is the author of the critically acclaimed books, The Dream Keepers, Successful Teachers of African American Children, Crossing to Canaan, The Journey of New Teachers in Diverse Classrooms, and Beyond the Big House, African American Educators on Teacher Education. She is editor of 6 other books and author of more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. She is the former editor of the American Educational Research Journal and a member of several editorial boards. Her work has won numerous scholarly awards, including the 2015 Social Justice and Education Award given by the American Educational Research Association. Tonight, Dr. Ladson-Billings' talk will reveal her ability to revise her own work in order to reveal its relevance for today. 23 years ago, Dr. Ladson-Billings concluded her landmark essay that was titled "Toward a Theory of Culturally Relevant Pedagogy," with a question often posed to her: "Isn't what you described as good teaching?" Her response: "Why does so little of it seem to occur in classrooms populated by African American students?" This question, unfortunately, still has currency today. Let us listen and learn. Dr. Ladson-Billings.
Thank you, Doris, for that really lovely introduction. I want to thank you, President Rose, and to the Dean, and special thank you to the Brodie family for your generosity and your commitment to education, and thank you to the Bowdoin community. This is my first visit to Bowdoin, so one other thing to check off my bucket list, huh? So I want to talk to you about really youth culture and its influence on teaching and learning. But before I do that, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping. I have to brag on these people. So that's my oldest granddaughter, who was an early round draft for the Atlanta Dream at the W, starting forward for she was a starting forward for the UCLA Bruins, got them to the Elite Eight in her senior year, broke their rebound record. She had 25 rebounds in a game. It's amazing. And is currently spending her second week in Daqing, China, because she just signed with a Chinese team for her off season. So now she's actually going to earn some money, okay? Because this WNBA thing doesn't pay anything, all right? And this is my new college freshman, Marlena, who is on scholarship at San Francisco State in volleyball. And this is her younger sister, Kayla, who just won the 2018 15, 16-year-old girls hammer throw for United States track and field. So they always ask, you gave a talk, did you put my picture up? Right. So I actually have two more, and that's their goal, is to get on the wall. So they're not there yet, so. So I've done that. If you run into any of these people, say, oh yeah, your grandmother put your picture up there, right? So I don't get in trouble. But for almost 30 years, I've been focused on helping teachers learn from the pedagogical expertise of those teachers who have been successful with African American students. I coined the term culturally relevant pedagogy, and I coined this term to describe the work of those teachers. Now, more recently, I've actually come to see how the culture that invigorates and enlivens today's students, hip-hop, is a primary driver in helping maintain culturally relevant pedagogy's viability and its usefulness. So in tonight's lecture, I want to describe how hip-hop provides what I would call a hope for engaging students in a culturally relevant way to ensure their academic, their cultural, and their social civic success. So you know, the vision of education in the US is as a primary vehicle for economic success. From the time that our kids go to school, they receive a message about going to school to get a good job. In fact, one of the things that I used to do every fall is that I would go to different school bus stops to watch kids begin the school year. And I always look for the kindergartners. They're easy to spot. They're the eager ones. They're so happy to be going. They have a big backpack that's bigger than they are. And they have the little Power Ranger, you know, Superman, Batman, lunchbox. And I would say to them, well, where are you going, sweetheart? I'm going to school. Oh, really? Why are you going to school? So I could get a good job. Okay, what's a job? I don't know. Right? So part of it is this mantra. We keep saying this to kids. And while the overall economic indicators do substantiate the notion that high school graduates earn more than high school dropouts, college graduates earn more than high school graduates, the idea that there is a direct connection between schooling and good jobs is not guaranteed. And I'm saying this as someone who had a kid who did all the right things. He graduated from high school, a good high school. He went to college, he graduated. But he was in that tech sector at the moment that the tech industry tanked. He could not get a good job initially. It wasn't his fault, and it wasn't school's fault. So we got to really help kids understand that the vicissitudes of the economy, the changing job landscape, offer no guarantee that a diploma or a degree will result in a job. Now, your parents would be mortified to hear that statement. They're counting on you getting a good job. But I want to make this point to underscore that we have to help our students understand that the reason that they should seek an education is larger than a job. It's linked to your own empowerment and your own liberation. So more than 27 years ago, I began investigating teachers who were successful with those students who we often think of as miserable failures in our current schools. I came to call this work culturally relevant pedagogy. So you either know it through that text, or if you were so inclined, you read the academic piece. And that notion of culturally relevant pedagogy serves as a theoretical construct for explaining the kind of education that is more likely to ensure the success of most students, particularly those students who traditionally have been underserved in our schools. Now, I want to remind you, this is a term I came up with, that there are no teachers walking around with t-shirts that say culturally relevant pedagogy, okay? Well, actually there are, because I went to a conference and they were selling them, and I was mortified. It's a term I came up with so I could talk to you. It's a term I came up with so I could talk to my colleagues. But it's not how the teachers think of themselves. They call themselves teachers and are often shocked to know that other people don't do what they do. So culturally relevant pedagogy involves 3 propositions. And hopefully that is an equilateral triangle. If it's not, blame it on Microsoft Word. Okay, not me. And I want it to be an equilateral triangle because I want you to really understand that all 3 of these propositions are equal, that if you don't have one, you're not doing what I would define as culturally relevant pedagogy. They include supporting student learning, or what you might call academic achievement, cultural competence, and encouraging socio-political consciousness. So I want to briefly discuss what I mean by each of these and how they apply not only to K-12 students, but also to post-secondary students and to those that we want to cultivate as teachers who can implement culturally relevant teaching in the classroom. So, the first proposition appears so obvious that it might seem unnecessary to talk about it. However, I want to make the point that much of what happens in classrooms, and especially college and university classrooms, has little to do with what students learn. Instead, the focus is on what teachers cover. Many of my university colleagues are proud that a certain number of their students do not pass their courses. They associate high failure rate with increased rigor. Now, this is an interesting proposition to me, or way of thinking to me, because I once agreed to be department chair. In Wisconsin, that's called the short straw job. You know, you don't really make any more money. Everybody's supposed to take a turn because we're just deeply democratic. And every year I had a reason for why I couldn't do it. You know, it came to me one year, I'm like, oh no, I'm president of AERA, I can't do this. And, oh no, I'm the editor of the American Education. I always had a reason. And in 2008, I was on sabbatical, and in a weak moment, they called to let me know I have been unanimously elected department chair. I have a sneaking suspicion that I ran unopposed. And it was 2008, and I said, you know, y'all are letting this Obama thing go to your head, you know. you ain't got to vote for every black person you see, you know. But one of the things that happened to me during my term as department chair was I was asked to do a interview with a local reporter because my department had the highest grade point average at the university. Well, I was really proud. I'm like, okay, sure. I thought it was a good thing. It turned out it was allegedly a bad thing because there was some notion that if you have this high grade point average, you must not have a very rigorous program. And I said, well, I don't think I agree with your reasoning here. Number one, you have all the data. How many freshmen do I have in my department? I already knew the answer, of course. 0. How many sophomores do I have? Well, I thought that number was 0, but it turned out it was 4, so I don't know how they got in, but. Because we really didn't take students until their junior year. They had successfully completed all their general requirements. And we had another admissions process, so we're skimming from an institution that sees itself as the premier institution in the state. So we already take the best students in the state, and then we skim from, so yeah, my students are really good. So his response was, well, the math department has the lowest grade point average in the university. And I said, but half them people don't want to be there. The university requires that they complete a Quant A, Quant B sequence as a part of their general education. They'll never go back to the math department. My folks are choosing to come, and yes, they're doing well, but that notion that high failure rate means rigor is kind of prevalent. What happens is people who think like that see their course as sieves that allow only a small percentage of the students to get through. But a culturally relevant approach sees student learning as the goal for every student. So rather than creating a sieve, culturally relevant teachers create a net a net that is designed to catch all the students. The goal is not coverage, it is mastery. So one of the tasks that I included in a course that I offer, entitled Culturally Relevant Pedagogy, is to have students go observe teaching in some place other than the School of Education. I give my School of Ed colleagues a pass. I know they don't want students coming back talking about how bad they are, so you can't go to the School of Education. But they're encouraged to go to some of the other professional schools. They can go to the law school or the business school or the medical school. They can go to other parts of the university like the College of Letters and Sciences or the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. But I even encourage them to look at teaching in non-traditional settings, such as a swim class or Tai Chi, yoga, athletic coaching. And some years ago, one of my students did her observation of teaching in the medical school's cadaver lab. And what she described was an excellent example of a teacher who was focused on mastery, not coverage. The lab was comprised of students in groups of 8. And 2 of the 8 students had been in the lab earlier and completed it. And it was on, the day she went to observe, it was on the renal system. So these 2 students had come the day before and done the lab. Their task was to teach the renal system to the other 6 students in their group. The medical professor and a mortician were also in the lab, observing and walking around from group to group. The 2 student teachers were detailed and meticulous about their teaching. They were quizzing the students in their group throughout and checking to make sure every student fully understood the renal system. So my student's description was, oh my gosh, you should have seen these students who were teaching. They were like, do you get it? Do you understand it? Say it back. I'm not sure you understand. Let's go back through this. And she said she finally realized that the reason that the students were so careful with their group members was that the medical professor would eventually choose 2 of those 6 students to take the lab exam for the entire group. And the grade that those 2 students received would be averaged and given to everybody. The medical school is looking for maximum competence from its soon-to-be doctors, not coverage from its professors. You know, if I have kidney failure, I don't want a C student, okay? I want somebody that really got it, right? So what might it mean for us to develop teachers who determined and demanded this kind of high-level performance from all of their students? The second component of culturally relevant pedagogy is perhaps the most misunderstood. When I use this term, I am referring to one's ability to be firmly grounded in his or her own culture of origin and fluent in at least one other culture. Now, for most students of color, this generally means that they develop a deep understanding and appreciation of their own heritage, history, language, and customs, while also accessing the mainstream culture. White middle-class students are not exempt from developing cultural competence. Now, this one is a particularly interesting component to me because I have 4 kids, 3 boys and 1 girl. There is a huge age span between my youngest son and my daughter. That's why my hair is this color. You know, she's often said to me, oh, you should dye your hair. I'm like, sweetheart, this is not my hair. This is your hair. I didn't have this hair before I met you. You know? And you know, if you have more than 1 child, you know they all have their own personalities. I have a musician, I have an athlete, and I have this youngest son who is the most sociable kid you ever want to meet. So all of these report cards from kindergarten through grade 12 say the same thing about him being too social. Now, this is a hard concept for me because I was trained in anthropology and I don't understand how human beings can be too social. To me, that's like saying, oh, that ant is really social. You know, he needs to figure out a way to just build that colony by himself. I mean, it's what they do. So I always got these report cards about my too social kid. And so one of these times, he's in about the 11th grade, and once again, I get this, and the counselor wants to speak to me. And it just so happened that the counselor asked to speak to me around the time that the high school newspaper had come out, and they had created what's called, in the high school paper, what's called the click map. Now, every high school has something like this. It might not be called that. And I know this because I actually, when I teach freshmen, I make them draw their click maps from the high school that they attended. Where's the common space in your school, and which groups sit where? So it could be a cafeteria, it could be some multi-purpose, but there's some place where this group is over here and this group is over there. And so they'd done it with a grid and a legend and all, so you could see. So I took it with me to the meeting with the counselor. And so, of course, I sat there for the 12th year in a row, kindergarten through 11th grade, listening to my too social kid, and he needs to focus and buckle down. And I said, you know, I couldn't help but notice that you guys published the click map. Where on the map does Kevin belong? So she looked at it and she said, oh, well, I've seen him with the jocks. I said, well, he's on the football team. Well, I've seen him with the tech geeks. Well, he really does love technology. I've seen him with the theater crowd. He's a very dramatic kid. And we go group by group. My kid doesn't miss a group. I mean, she says, oh, you may not want to hear this, but I've seen him with the stoners. I'm like, That would be my kid, right? So here is a kid who has connected with every single group that's outlined on this map. And it's considered a bad thing. Now let's fast forward. He gets through college. The tech markets recover. He gets a job that he really likes in Silicon Valley. And his job is communication between upper management and the people in those Tyvek suits in the clean rooms, because he knows how to talk to everybody. He also has a client load that includes Japan, Taiwan, China, Korea, Germany, and France. And I remember saying to him, Kevin, you know, how are you doing this? I know that you really didn't, the only one of those languages you ever studied really was German, but, you know, and you don't speak it that well. Like, how are you pulling this off? He said, well, Mom, when I go to Germany, Hans and Franz are not playing. They are like, Herr Kevin, we've got to get this work done today, right now. He said, but when I roll over to France, Jacques is like, oh, Kevin, you work too hard. Not too hard. Let us have another glass of wine. We do this later. He said, if I go in with the attitude it has to get done the way I want it done, on the time frame that I want it done, I may lose a customer, a client. If I lose a client, we lose money. If we lose money, I lose my job. So I said, so what's the skill that you use? He said, I've learned to listen to people. The very thing that school from kindergarten through 12th grade said was his shortcoming is really his strong suit. And I think a lot of times we've been so focused on people getting these sort of technical skills. But when we talk to employers, they say over and over, we just need people to get soft skills. We can teach them the technical stuff. We need people who know how to get along with folks. We need people who can be in different workplaces. So this notion of cultural competence is important. And so what I would say is that although schools typically cater to a white middle-class culture, I think it's really important for white students to become fluent also in something other than their culture. I think in an ideal world, all of our students would leave school multiculturally competent. to be able to deal facilely with the cosmopolitan global world in which they'll find themselves. But at minimum, each student should leave school at least biculturally competent. They should have at least a language other than their first language. But how can we develop culturally competent students if our teachers are culturally incompetent? The third component of culturally relevant pedagogy, socio-political consciousness or critical consciousness, is the one that I think is the most ignored. I think teachers understand the need to ensure student learning and that some are sympathetic to supporting students' cultural competence. However, the idea of helping students engage directly in the social and civic concerns of their schools, their communities, their localities, the nation, and the world seem beyond the scope of many classroom teachers. Now, in plain English, I call this component the so what factor, because our students regularly ask us why they have to learn particular things, and we regularly respond with, because you're gonna need this one day. By about 4th or 5th grade, they realize we're lying. I'm always tempted to buy this t-shirt that says, yet another day in which I did not use the Pythagorean theorem. I'm not hating on the math people. I actually think there is value to the Pythagorean theorem. I just like the way the shirt looks. And those of our students who are savvy will learn, or should I really say memorize, what we teach in order to pass our tests and to pass our classes. But those who are less plugged into education will resist, and they'll resist in ways that are detrimental to their own academic well-being. A culturally relevant approach to teaching helps students understand that their learning can and should be connected to the everyday problems of living in a society that's deeply divided along racial, ethnic, linguistic, economic, environmental, social, political, religious, and cultural lines. And they should be learning that education can and should help alleviate those problems and those divisions. That's the whole point that Thomas Jefferson had in mind when he talked about the need for an educated citizenry. It's interesting, I just came back from the University of Virginia last week, and so I've been sort of deeply steeped in Jefferson. I don't know why you have to have 10 and 12 statues of Jefferson. I mean, okay, we get it, okay? Monticello, the whole thing. It's like everywhere you look, there's another Thomas Jefferson statue. Now, having a whole bunch of Bucky Badgers, I get, you know, we had like 55 of them around the city of Madison this summer, and it was a wonderful scavenger hunt to go find the Buckies. But, so those are the three components. And so here I am here more than 27 years past my first inquiries on culturally relevant pedagogy. And I find that this notion of culturally relevant pedagogy, at least my understanding and practice of it, is evolving in some new and exciting ways. And it's those new ways in which I want to focus the remainder of my remarks on. How culturally relevant pedagogy can meet the needs of new century students and their teachers, regardless of level. That is, from elementary school through graduate school. So first I have a question for you. How many of you are on Twitter? Okay, that's great. But if you're not, you're already behind the curve with new century students. Because we're looking at the most technologically astute, plugged in, globally connected generation that the world has ever seen. However, when I walk into most schools, I see signs throughout admonishing against cell phone use. I was in a school near Indianapolis, and I walked into the classroom, and the sign said, no cell phones, no cell phones, no cell phones. I really wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, it's not a cell phone. It's a computer. Now, that old school flip phone you got with the factory ring, okay, that's a cell phone. Okay. But even in developing nations, very poor communities. I was in a rural community in South Africa a couple years ago in the Free State, and literally they didn't have electricity reliably throughout a day. But everybody, at least all of the kids, had cell phones. So this notion that, they shouldn't have it, I think is an interesting one, and it reminds me of people who know me know I'm a bit of a sports junkie. And so, a couple years ago, the men's and women's basketball teams at the University of South Carolina ended up in the Final Four. The women won it all, the men lost. But this quote comes from the men's coach, Frank Martin. Because one of the things that I think we keep talking about is how different the kids are. And Martin said, you know what makes me sick to my stomach? When I hear grown people say that kids have changed. The kids haven't changed. The kids don't know anything about anything. We've changed as adults. We demand less of kids. We expect less of kids. We make their lives easier instead of preparing them for what life is truly about. We're the ones that have changed. And I think about that when I think about how differently I, as a parent, have responded to my kids versus what my parents did. There were just certain things my parents said, no, you can't do that. I get worn down pretty easy, I was like, no, we're not getting no video games, well, yeah, here, get the video game. You're making me crazy, right? So there are ways in which we as the adults haven't set parameters and haven't decided this is what we find acceptable. But one of the things that I think is different is this totally different understanding of devices. So the difference between a cell phone and actually a smartphone. And that's but one example of how what I call new century students are different from their counterparts of earlier generations. So each year, Beloit College in Beloit, Wisconsin, conducts what's called the Mindset List for its incoming freshman year class. In the 2016, the Mindset List included the following, and I'm just going to give you like 10 out of the 75 things they come up with that I thought were interesting. One, that this is a generation that has always lived in cyberspace, addicted to the new generation of electronic narcotics. What's the next thing? I gotta get the next one. For them, Michael Jackson's family, not the Kennedys, constitute American royalty. So that just bothers me to no end, because I remember Jackie in a little pillbox hat and, and Jack with his, head of, I used to say something about the water in Massachusetts. These people have the best hair, Mitt had good hair and, Dukakis had good hair. And I'm like, what is it with these guys out of Massachusetts and this hair, right? Well, we thought of them as royalty, the notion of Camelot. They are a group of folks that if they miss the Daily Show, they can go to the YouTube and get the news they want. For them, Bill Clinton is a senior statesman of whose presidency they have little knowledge. So they were saying to me, who was that white-haired dude up there with Hillary? I'm like, oh, yikes, that's that was the president, This one I find pretty interesting is they've never seen an airplane ticket. Yeah, I got my ticket. No, you got a boarding pass. See these little numbers up here? There's actually a ticket somewhere out there, but you haven't had it. It's not in your hand. For them, women have always piloted warplanes and space shuttles, so they don't understand what the big deal is when we talk about women in space. For them, Star Wars has always been just a film, not a defense strategy, right? Those of us in the room who are baby boomers know that, this is what Ronald Reagan was going to give us, Star Wars, right? They have come to political consciousness during a time of increasing doubts about America's future. I find that one interesting because, as I said, as a baby boomer, I came through the 60s and all that turbulence, but even in the midst of that, we always saw America as ascendant. It's getting better. That's not so certain with the young people we encounter today. Maybe it's going to be China, maybe it's going to be India. It's not clear, right? For them, the Twilight Zone involves vampires, not Rod Serling. For the young people in the room, we used to watch a program called The Twilight Zone every Friday night. And the man who was the host was Rod Serling. And they watch television everywhere but on television. Now, I know because I have this younger daughter who never turns on the TV. She's in the TV room, but she doesn't turn on the TV. What I've shared with you is just 10 of 75 items on that list to underscore how rapidly new technologies have widened the generation gap. Aging baby boomers who have always considered themselves hip or cool or with it are now struggling to connect with Generation Y students who will teach what I term new century students. And while I haven't conducted a scientific study of new century students, I've made some what I believe are testable observations about them as learners. And I think we have to consider these tendencies as we evaluate our teaching. One thing is that they believe multitasking is an efficient way to work. Now, we actually have pretty good science that says it's not. You know, the cognitive scientists tell us if you're trying to do more than one thing at a time, you're not going to give close enough to attention to any of those things. Do not tell that to my daughter. I walk into that TV room, she has her laptop open, she's listening to her iPod, she's texting on her telephone, she's scrolling through websites, and I say, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm writing a paper." This notion that I can do all of these things at one time is very evident among this generation. They see themselves more as consumers than students. And as such, they are either purchasing an education or shopping for schools. Now, this is a point where I think Frank Martin's admonition comes in well, because they see themselves as consumers because we made them into that. We sell them on a college. I don't know whether Bowdoin has a view book, but going through this experience with my daughter, who was a very good student with really good grades and good board scores, everybody was sending her a fancy, glossy view book to get her to come. She has so many of them that we had to get a crate, and we were putting them in alphabetical order, and so that the strategy was it comes, she takes a look at it, and then I file it. But she got a view book from the University of Colorado Boulder, and it just sat on the kitchen counter. So after a couple of weeks, I said, "Jessica, you gonna look at this? What do you want to do with this?" She said, you can toss that one. And I said, "Really? Why?" She said, "Those people are not interested in education. They just selling mountains." And if you see the cover of it, it's these beautiful Rocky Mountains. And then you can see the sort of red tile roof of the University of Colorado, but there's no computers, there's no labs, there's no test tubes. And so I jokingly shared with, I have good colleagues at Colorado, I said, "Yeah, my daughter said, y'all ain't really serious about education, you just selling mountains." And she said, "Yeah, she's pretty much right." You know, we're competing with California. We got to tell people you can have sun and ski, right? So then students think they're buying an education. They see themselves as consumers. As I mentioned earlier, they receive their news and information via push notices from their favorite internet sites and blogs and programs like The Daily Show. This is interesting that I've noticed about them, that although they're heavily invested in social justice, they're less sanguine about social welfare, particularly if they have to bear the costs. So the debate about health care is that thing that, yes, they believe everybody should have health care. They don't believe they should pay for a bunch of old people, right? So then I have to break it down so they can understand it. I said, "Look, honey, it's like the Lion King. It's the circle of life, right? Somebody paid for you to get out of that hospital when you were born. Now it's your turn, right?" They have that same attitude towards Social Security, right? They think that our seniors should have a social safety net. They just don't think money should be taken out of their pockets to pay for it. This is for my faculty friends in the audience. Email is an old technology. Stop emailing these people. They don't read their emails. They would prefer to communicate via instant messaging, text, or tweets. If you text them, they get it, right? For them, library research can best be done on their desktop which means they rarely leaf through an entire journal. Those of you who are my era where we went to the library and pulled the journal off the shelf to look for the article know that we often came across another article that wasn't assigned but was even more interesting, right? They don't do that. They read that one PDF you assign because that's the one that they can get access to through their desktop or laptop. They believe it's important to stay connected. Thus, their phones are always at hand, and classes that prohibit cell phone use interrupt their connections. A couple years ago, I was at a political forum, and one of the things on the larger agenda in Wisconsin was a case about voter ID. And in the middle of the forum, one of the candidates said, just learned that the Supreme Court has struck down the voter ID for that particular election that was coming. You will know that it eventually got instated, but at that time it was. And so people were clapping, and I was sitting next to a young person, and she said to me, "Y'all just found that out?" Because she had her device, and she'd already got a notice. She knew a couple hours ago. And that's the world in which our young people live. And then finally, they have very different conceptions of copyright, intellectual property, and plagiarism rules. When I first began in the academy, I never had to really teach that. Now I actually do have to go over it because they're used to being in an environment where you sample, where everything is a mashup. You take a little from here, a little from there. They don't see it as cheating because they live in an entertainment community that people are always taking a bit from this and that. So that's one of the things that I think is really different about how they see the world. Now, what I'm offering these observations not to suggest that we have to adapt to their standards, but rather to suggest it's important to know where they are so that we can do a better job of understanding them and assisting them in the classroom and beyond. So a decade ago, when we referenced the digital divide, we were talking solely about the way social status, class, race, ethnicity, in some cases gender, kept some students from accessing electronic information. However, with the advent of smartphones and tablet computing and other mobile devices, electronic communication has become ubiquitous. As I mentioned earlier, even in developing nations, mobile devices provide access to information and global communications in the classroom. So the new digital divide is that which exists between generations. That teacher on the flip phone is unable to keep up with his or her smartphone using students to maintain live Twitter feeds or classroom blogs. And when our students can access information and knowledge via things like iTunes U and other open access online classrooms, we have to create more imaginative and engaging spaces in our courses. I work with a scholarship program at the University of Wisconsin, and one of the things I would regularly advise students who were struggling, and one of the courses they often struggled in was Chem 103, is that sort of introduction. Even if they had advanced placement credit in chemistry, they struggled in Chem 103. I would have them join a MOOC, not for credit, but to be able to find another professor. And I said, go to the beginning and see how much of it you understand. And then just keep following it along. It's like your own personal tutor. So they have that access, something we didn't have. Now, the next point that I make will probably be the most controversial thing I say, and that is that hip-hop can be an important cultural vehicle for connecting with New Century students. Now, before I lose the entire over 40 audience, I want to be clear. I am not suggesting that you should adopt the hip-hop aesthetic, so you don't have to drop your pants, you ain't got to turn your hats on backwards, none of that, right? But rather, the anthropologist in me believes it's important to know as much about a culture with which you work as possible. For instance, when I was teaching Puerto Rican students in North Philadelphia, I began a deep and rigorous study of Puerto Rican culture and the specifics of the 2 Puerto Rican communities that made their way to Philadelphia. Knowing more about those cultures helped me to plan relevant learning activities, it increased my communication with the parents, and it boosted student success. It did not make me Puerto Rican. I'm always reminded of a young man I had in my 8th grade class named Heriberto Cruz. And I had this rule in the class that said, if you don't do your homework, you give up your break. So you come back at break time and back to me and work on your homework. But if you have a note from your parents, you can be excused. And I'll never forget that Heriberto came once, he hadn't done his homework, and I said, well, you know, you gotta come back here for your break. He said, no, I have a note. I said, okay, give me the note. So the note, I said, well, who wrote the note? My dad. Well, I had been to every one of my kids' homes. I knew Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz did not write a note that I could read because Mr. Cruz did not speak English. But the note said the following: Dear teacher, please excuse Heriberto from doing his homework. Last night he had a brain tumor. I said, Heriberto, this is a note, and you are excused. But we are going to revisit this note policy. It was knowing that this kid, you know, he wasn't a bad kid. He didn't get his homework done. And he'd been pretty imaginative in trying to figure out, what can I let her know that happened to me that was serious enough not to do the homework? And I'm sure he watched one of those medical shows, and in the medical show, the subdural hematoma is over in an hour, okay? It's really bad, and you might die. You certainly can't do homework when you got that. But you'll be okay the next day, at least according to the show. But I didn't know these families. I didn't know these communities. I think the same thing happened when I moved to California. I had to do that same kind of research as I worked with Chicano and Mexican national students. Again, knowing more about Mexican and Mexican-American culture didn't make me Mexican, didn't make me Mexican-American, but it made me better able to serve the needs of the students who sat before me each day. So today our students are, in some ways, a new breed, and I've called them new century students. Today's dream keepers, I think, have to be different than those ones that I studied in 1989. These folks had a focus on cultural history and revealing the kinds of things that textbooks omit or distort. They had a focus on community issues, things like urban renewal or veterans issues or homelessness. But they had a limited focus on student culture. I had one teacher in my study who used rap lyrics to teach poetry. So if you want to be a dream keeper in the 21st century model, you have to include popular culture to your understanding of culture, not just sort of adult culture. You need to recognize hip hop's longevity and its power. There are many of us sitting here tonight who remember people saying, oh, that hip hop thing, that ain't gonna last. Okay, we are 40 years into not lasting. I think it's gonna last. And in fact, I teach a course on hip hop and education, and one of the first questions in the course is, who introduced you to hip hop? And a large portion of the class will say, my parents. So I'm literally teaching the children of hip hop heads. And we need to catch up with Madison Avenue. Madison Avenue has figured out there's something in this hip hop thing that is attractive to consumers. So here's an example.
You watch me get Fred's Fruity Pebbles.
Who are you?
I'm the master rapper and I'm here to sing. I love Fruity Pebbles in a major way.
He loves Fruity Pebbles in a major way.
The bedrock yellow, orange, purple, lime, and red. But to get the fruity taste, I gotta trick Fred. Fruity.
To get the fruity taste, he's got to trick Fred. Bonnie.
Guess that's a wrap.
Host Fruity Pebbles cereal, part of this nutritious breakfast. Yabba-dabba delicious.
So first of all, ain't nobody ate no Fruity Pebbles in a minute, right? That's an old commercial. But somehow, way back there, Madison Avenue said, there's something about this that speaks directly to young people. And we could deconstruct it and look at the fact that really Barney is invoking Run DMC. He got the pork pie hat, he got the wraparound sunglasses, the little golden neck. Barney got on Adidas, y'all. You know the Flintstones don't wear shoes. So there's this just lifting from this culture because they realize it speaks to the kids in a particular way. They kind of get it. But today's students are, in some ways, quite a new breed. I've called them new century students. And because of their deep connection to hip hop, they're something like shapeshifters. They don't fit neatly into the rigid categories of race, class, gender, or national origin that we've relied upon to make distinctions and to create hierarchy. Their sports heroes and heroines include people like LeBron James and J.J. Watt, Gabby Douglas. I could also include Serena Williams, or Lolo Jones. They go across race. They're not just narrow. They listen to Drake, Bruno Mars, and Nicki Minaj. Now, I got Justin up there because Justin need prayer, y'all, so I feel obligated to give Justin some opportunity for prayer. But this is a generation that's more likely to endorse same-sex marriage, and they can indeed separate out hip-hop traditions. We're baby boomers and their parents hear it all as noise, and I will remind you, baby boomers, that our parents called rock and roll and rhythm and blues noise. They point out that there's important differences in the genres of hip hop. So there are traditions that include East Coast, West Coast, Southern, trap, world scene, gangster, battle, conscious. What you can't see on there is also crunk. There's all kinds of hip hop. So to say that, oh, I reject it because it's all violent, it's sort of like going into an X-rated movie and saying, oh, I'm never going to the movies again because movies are pornographic. Or it's like picking up a Harlequin romance, reading it and go, oh my God, I'm never going to read another book because it's just pablum. It's a genre. And these young people know which genres they like. They don't like all of them. So they also know that there are huge differences in the artists. There's a difference between Lil Wayne and Immortal Technique. There's a big difference between Lil Kim and Anna Tijoux. And they know that this culture that they've created is a mashup, and it has permeable boundaries, simultaneously sacred and profane. You have folks with deep religious convictions and an embrace of all things secular. So you have MCs like Lupe Fiasco and Omar Offendum who do not hide their Muslim faith. They end up working in local, national, and global contexts with music and film about Trayvon Martin and Arab Spring. You have hip-hop filmmakers like Eli Jacob from Talsi, who makes global hip-hop films like Inventos, Hip Hop Cubanos, and Homegrown Hip Life in Ghana. I would also let you know that Eli has made perhaps 5 trips to Puerto Rico since Hurricane Maria. He has delivered over 3,000 pounds of relief supplies, not paper towels, to people because they were hurting. And while they're given free concerts to just kind of lift people's spirits. These young people that we work with are not slackers who don't care about education. Quite the contrary. They desire to be deeply engaged in learning, but they don't want to receive a passive education where rote memorization and regurgitation passes for learning. They want to innovate and create and implement. They are, as hip-hop science educator Christopher Emden, and that's Chris on that end, of Teachers College, Columbia University, say science-minded. And as science-minded individuals, they want to do science rather than just read about it. You have scholars like Jeff Duncan Andrade at San Francisco State, Patrick Camignon at the University of San Francisco, and Ernest Morel at Notre Dame, who work in this era and these genres. You also have folks like Dawn Alyssa Fisher from San Francisco State, Dr. Elaine Richardson of Ohio State, who is a performing artist. So she is a full professor in English at Ohio State Monday through Friday, but on Saturday, she's on the stage singing. Maisha Nguyen, who does wonderful work in restorative justice at the University of California, Davis. You have scholars like Mark Lamont Hill, and many of you may recognize Mark from TV because he's often a commentator on CNN, but he's also a full professor at Temple University, both in their School of Mass Communication and Education. Or Sammy Aleem, who is a global linguist at UCLA. Or Sam Seidel, who works with T.C. Ellis to document the work of the High School of the Recording Arts, where kids who previously were headed for failure gain a second chance to put their knowledge and skill in popular culture and the arts to work for both fun and profit. LeBron James has given over $1 million to this high school for helping kids with their entrepreneurial interests. On my own campus, we've been really fortunate to have MC Light invest in a program that we have. We have 2 MC Light fellows. She's given over $2 million to us to really encourage young women in hip hop. We have perhaps the most innovative program on our campus known as First Wave. These are young people that we actually recruit and give full tuition scholarships to because of their hip hop artists' skills. So we go to a lot of poetry slams. We go to hip hop art as in graffiti. We look at dancing. We look at all of the elements of hip hop and offer these young people scholarships. And we are in our 11th cohort. We've been doing it for 12 years. We had 1 year moratorium last year because we had some change in leadership. But these young people have appeared on Broadway. They were part of the Cultural Olympics in London during the London 2012 Olympics. They were in Denver performing at the American Sociological Association. We had one First Wave student, Jasmine Mans, who was named one of Glamour's top 10 collegiates. Before Jasmine left Wisconsin, she had published 2 books. You know, it made some of my assistant professors really feel bad. It was like, wait a minute. And I think we have a marvelous opportunity to engage with what I see as the most exciting generations of students the world has ever seen. I want to share with you one of our students who is now in a, well, I won't tell you that yet. I'll let you see his piece. His name is Jonathan Williams, and this is an award-winning performance that he gave for the Raise Up Foundation. It's designed to work against high school dropouts.
We have our last and final Raise Up champion, Raise Up winner and champion. His name is Jonathan Williams. He's out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I want y'all to give it up for Jonathan Williams, y'all.
Jonathan Williams, absent. See, I always had the mental capacity and the master key to overcome any academic tragedy, but I had to see and learn from my faults, because my rotten GPA were where my lessons were taught. I was a 3.6 high achiever up in middle school. No guidance resided in my silence, and swimming pools didn't appreciate the doggy paddle that I had mastered when Jonathan Williams was absent. Alexander Hamilton High, Milwaukee Public Schools' finest. I learned the art of skipping classes and wrote Bueller on my eyelids. Detention room sidekick with some fly kicks and a tight click. Balled up homework in the same fist these students fight with. Jonathan Williams, absent. It was tragic. Amidst good times and laughing, my GPA was dragging against a system not meant for me, mentally in misery. My freshman year stats, 102 days absent. All Fs, 0.0 GPA, cumulative. Swimming pool, doggy paddle. Drowning, I started a movement for improvement, but couldn't dry off with the white towels my teachers threw in. I tried to show my mind can grow like every other student, but people pass on your perspective when your presence also truant. More than a reflection of a freshman year screw up with a blueprint of a ladder, but no tools for me to move up. No electricity, mom and pop's missing, so have them drop out. That's just family tradition. Jonathan Williams, absent. I found a flashlight by the name of Uncle Jeff. Moved in. The floor and 3 pillows were enough for me to stay focused, make sure this hopeless ship stays floating. By my senior year, I was actually a senior. Hey, you know, dressed a little cleaner, professional demeanor. It seems to be I'm on track like Jackie Joyner with 6 medals, fighting my academic debt and my 5th medal. But the worst thing you can see when you made it and educated are the people who gave up and them obstacles you evaded. Cause I mean, we quicker to give up than you do. I mean, we just like YouTube, we just broadcast ourselves and hope that you like it. Maybe care to comment, cause I didn't need to be hooked on phonics, I just needed the people around me to be critical and honest, cause we don't know yet that resources and allocated money is the hood's morphine. The only scholarships I knew of was professional sports teams. Now I'm here. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A scholar and resident, full tuition scholarship and Kappa Alpha Psi president. So I'm saying we can be useless, clueless, ruthless, just a nuisance, worthless, workless, just the worst urban person, but we gotta reconstruct our approach to avoid these different labels and synonyms and help the youth overcome this system that's not meant for them. Thank you.
Jonathan is currently finishing his MFA at the University of Florida, one of 6 students chosen in the nation. This kid is amazing. He spent a semester abroad in Barcelona. He's applied for every opportunity possible, but you heard him say what his high school freshman year was like. 102 days absent. It's only 180 days in the school year. He failed everything. And in most systems, he would be done for. There would be no ability to recover. And yet, this thing he loved doing, this spoken word, is really what brought him to a place that made him competitive in the classroom and able to go on. I want to show you one more student, Donez Smith, who was one of our first cohorts, and including Donez because he just won a major literary competition, young poet. I don't even remember what it was. It was just announced within a month or so ago.
Everybody, please welcome to the stage, Donez Smith. How y'all doing? I hear really awkward 9th grade classes at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning, so I'm more excited than that. We are educators, we can sound excited for education. How are you doing? My name is Donez Smith. I am a poet, I am an educator, I am a human being and a Black man. I have come to you today to talk about student voice. I'm gonna try to lead this talk today through my own pedagogy. I don't have data because I don't have data yet, but I have stories for you, and that's what I ask of my students. I have my story, I have myself, and I have the ability to reflect on the work that I've done. Start with myself. Who am I? I am a mama's boy. I am a St. Paul native. I am very, very Black in a political sense and a racial sense. I am an educator. I am a queer man. I am hopelessly romantic and very stubborn to go on dates, and that is who I bring into the classroom every day, maybe not the date part. And all those voices fight to speak, and luckily I've lived a life where I've been able to speak to all those voices and all those identities in me, and it's my work to hear those voices coming from all my students. I want to backtrack, talk a little bit about where I come from and what's grounding all my work. In 3rd grade, I could not read at all. Spelled my name wrong. I could barely tell you what it was. I didn't understand letters. I didn't know how to put things together. And it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't smart. I knew I was bored. School was boring. I didn't want to read about princesses and magical frogs or look at these storybooks that looked nothing like my family or the places that I came from. It wasn't what I was interested in either. They tried to get me to read things like Goosebumps because that was supposed to be cool in the 90s, but I didn't like ghosts. They weren't real. I had a really Christian black grandma. She wouldn't let me believe in ghosts unless it was holy. I didn't connect to any of these things. And finally, a former Miss Minnesota winner, Miss Delavadova, my 3rd grade teacher, God bless her, asked me a question that I have never been asked before. What is it that you want to read? And it wasn't about what was available in her classroom or the 3 books that some reading specialist had laid out in front of me about locusts and a princess and a castle. But what do you really want to read? And I was dumbfounded. I didn't know what to tell her. I shouted out the first thing that came to my mind. I want to read about video games. She said, okay. And I went home and I had all these video game magazines that I could only look at the pictures of and think that they were cool and know that I wanted to buy that game. And she gave me access to something that I actually believed in. She worked with me throughout that year. By the end of that year, I went from not being able to read at all to reading at a 5th grade level. And it's all because of her work and her asking me a question and believing that answer. Flash forward to 9th grade, I am now technically good at school. I am the C student in all the advanced classes. I hate school. Once again, I find this boring. I'm not learning about anything. I'm just learning how to give the teachers back what they're giving me. I wind up in this weird, wacky theater class, and I knew it wasn't weird or wacky, but I didn't have the language at the time to say how transformative it really was gonna be for me. It was a social justice-centered education program. It was awesome. I spent the first day, I think the teacher was about 5 minutes late, just rolling around on the ground screaming, which is pretty much a good analogy about who I was at 14, rolling around on the ground screaming about anything. And the teacher came in and she started her work, and eventually she asked all of us, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to perform about? And I was not ready for that question. And it's funny how really simple questions and knowing that somebody is sincere in asking you that can completely change your mindset as a student. That year we created, and throughout my 4 years of high school, I stayed with that teacher, and we created brilliant work about issues that we found relevant. We wrote and performed our own plays and our own poems, and that set me along a whole artistic path, but a whole creative path and a whole critical path in my education from that class, and learning that my voice was truly valued, that I had something to say. I started doing better in all of my subject areas. I started to become invested in school as long as I had somebody there to work with me that was invested in my ideas and not interested in teaching me what I needed to learn, but helping me access what was already within myself. When I went to college, I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison to be a part of the only hip-hop scholarship program in the nation. I did not at the time associate Madison, Wisconsin with hip hop. Maybe cheese, maybe good beer that I wasn't supposed to be drinking as a freshman, but definitely not hip hop. And when we showed up there, once again, I was presented with a question that I had no idea how to answer. What do you want to build? And with that program, the First Wave program at Madison, Wisconsin, we built something that is now 7 years strong. I was part of the very first year, and we helped each other access our creativity, not just in terms of art, but our science majors who were also artists, having them go off and explore brilliant, brilliant experiments and questions that they had, and we learned how to access each other and how to collaborate and how to talk and how to reflect, and oh my God, it was brilliant! All because somebody asked us a question and we knew that we didn't have to say the right thing, but we had to say what felt right to us. And that's why I came back to St. Paul to try to infuse some of that energy into this space. I am a cultural specialist for St. Paul Public Schools. I go into rooms that look like the United Nations, that usually have a syllabus that looks like the Senate. And I ask students what they want to learn.
So I want to stop it there because I just wanted you to see his trajectory. The fact that He was one of the early cohort members is really important because he's gone off to do amazing things. If you're really interested in our program, Wisconsin Public Television has produced a documentary on it called Hip Hop U. It was just aired in September, but you can find it online. That really talks about what we tried to do with that program and how we're trying to bring different voices to our campus. We've just graduated our first African-American woman astrophysicist out of hip hop. She loves physics, but she loves hip hop. And we found a way to help her marry them both. She has this incredible crush on Neil deGrasse Tyson, so when we brought him to campus, we made sure she got to meet him, and she was just gaga. Oh my God, you have no way of knowing Professor Ladson-Billings, how I feel. I said, I kind of get it, I kind of get it. Kind of how I feel about Julius Erving, right? But they've been amazing young people. I put this slide up here to let you know that if you are indeed the least bit interested in this notion of hip-hop education, every Tuesday night, we have a Twitter conversation. See, I'm really trying to get you on Twitter. At 9 o'clock Eastern, at this address, #HipHopEd. You don't have to say anything, but you can follow the conversation. And we take up all kinds of issues. Sometimes, we've had it where it's been simultaneous with the State of the Union, and so you have these people injecting their thought about what got said, or other current issues. We've gone through all the curriculum areas: hip-hop and English language arts, hip-hop and mathematics, hip-hop and science, hip-hop in second language learning, as a way to figure out how do we use this very powerful tool that our students have just gravitated to as a way to get them to think broadly about some other things and expansively. Finally, what I will say is that every summer, we do a program called Hip Hop in the Heartland, where we bring teachers for a week to our campus to learn how to use hip hop as a part of their pedagogy. We always tell them when they arrive on Monday morning, by the end of the week, you're going to be on the stage. And they're, no, not me, not me. Yeah, no, everybody ends up on the stage. It's a marvelous experience to see the transformation of these teachers and their understanding of how youth culture really impacts student learning. So I think we have this marvelous opportunity to engage with the most exciting generation of young students our world's ever seen. I think their passions and desires merge with new and exciting technologies. And they want teachers who will demand more from them than just maybe Googling some information and cutting and pasting it into a document. They want to do, they want to create, they want to inspire, and they want to innovate. They want to learn to think critically and analytically. They want to be serious about their education. And for them, hip hop might be their best hope. Thank you. This one.
Hi, thank you so much for your lecture. I would just be curious to know, I'm personally, I guess, interested in teaching in foreign language classrooms, and I'm curious to know how one could integrate culturally relevant pedagogy with including another language, and if hip hop is an avenue for that, or if there's an extra layer of something else to add to the classroom as well.
So it's interesting because one of the really exciting hip hop artists is from your area. You're from Minnesota, right? Twin Cities?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a Menominee artist by the name of Tall Paul who is using hip hop to revitalize the Menominee language. And if you get a chance, look him up. I think the video I'm thinking of is called Prayers, Tears for Prayers or something like that. His name is Tall Paul. But it's amazing how he's gotten people interested in learning Menominee. And I have had like 3 or 4 students who have tried to do research on revitalization, Menominee language revitalization. We have a large Menominee population in Wisconsin too. And mostly been unsuccessful with conventional ways. But here is someone using hip hop. I'm giving a talk next week at the WIDA conference, which is all about language acquisition. And one of the things I want to point out is that what's not talked about a lot in hip hop is the Latino or Latinx contribution to hip hop. It's very strong. The beginnings of hip hop, all of the b-boys, all of the breakdancers crews were Latinx. They were not black. We've somehow thought of it as a black thing. Eli, who I featured here, Jacob Fantalzi, the filmmaker, not only has done work in Cuba, but also in Colombia. Everywhere I've gone in the world, I've encountered hip hop. Brazil, Scotland. I was coming out of a restaurant in Scotland, and I could hear this beat, and I'm like, wait a minute, let me go in here and see who was in here. And trust me, nobody in there looked like me. But they were engaged in it. There has been something so powerful about it worldwide, and yet we tend to denigrate it here as this, oh, that's from the streets, that's this. I remind people that Shakespeare was from the streets. His early plays were not in big Broadway theater houses. They were for the common folk. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity because one of the things that draws people to hip hop is language, is the facility, the rhyme schemes, the fluency, all of that can be used in language learning. So.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, row 2 is now 2-0, y'all.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I had a question about cultural competency.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering that it seems like part of developing cultural competency is admitting to your students that there are things that you don't know and asking for their help in understanding that. So I was wondering how you can both do that while also maintaining their respect for your knowledge.
So one of the biggest challenges I have as a teacher educator is helping my students understand that they have a culture. See, I don't think cultural competency starts with learning about that other culture. I think it starts with learning that, yes, you have one. So when I first got to Wisconsin 27 years ago, my students would say to me, oh, we don't really have a culture, Dr. Ladson-Billings. We're just normal. Okay, I guess that would make me abnormal. Oh, no, that's not what we mean. We're just like regular. Oh, yeah, that's better. Okay. And I'm at that age where maybe I am sometime, but I don't want to be identified as irregular. So helping them understand that there's a Midwest culture. There's a Wisconsin culture. There's things that people do in Wisconsin they don't do nowhere else. Midwesterners don't like to talk about money. And they like it, but they don't want to talk about it. And I remember asking one of my colleagues one time how much he made, and you would have thought I'd asked him if he had slept with his wife the night before. I'm like, dude, it's a public institution. I'm 4 clicks away from finding it out. Just save me some time. How much you making? Now, why would I do that? Because I'm from Philadelphia, and that's all we talk about is money. If I show up at my family's house tomorrow wearing this dress, they will say, oh, that's nice. How much you pay for it? It's not considered rude. So what I found is that my big challenge was what I would call is that sort of helping them with that archaeological or that cultural excavation, digging to figure out, well, why do I do what I do? Why do I think this is the right way to do it? it's not about learning another culture, because the challenge of learning that other culture is it's not static. It's changing. So by the time you think you've got it, it's changed. I had a student who did a dissertation on 3 generations of Hmong immigrants. First generation born in Laos, raised in Laos. Second generation born in Laos, but raised in transition coming through Thailand and the Philippines and to the mainland. Third generation born right in Wisconsin. That third generation struggling to talk to the first. So if there's that much difference in a family, how is it you're gonna just learn a culture and nail it down? It just doesn't, it's not static. What you can learn, however, is your own culture and why you seem to think and believe and act in a particular way, and how that's changed over time. And then you begin to understand how culture functions. And there's nothing wrong with asking kids to explain things to you. One of the things that's an element of culturally relevant pedagogy is that teachers understand that the knowledge is not static, it's shared, it's recycled, everybody has knowledge. Our kids do not come to us as empty vessels. In one of my presentations, I shared the trailer from the documentary Babies, which is about the first year of life for 4 families, one in Namibia, one in Mongolia, one in Tokyo, and one in San Francisco. And it's sort of an amazing to see the similarities. These families don't know each other of that first year. But it's also some very specific kinds of cultural ways in which kids are interacting with their family members and the environment that they find themselves in. And that's the journey we're all on. So if these babies learn a number of things without us as teachers, I always tell teachers, when kids show up at 5 years old in kindergarten, they already learn to do a lot of stuff without you. They learn to walk without you. If you've ever watched a toddler trying to learn to walk, it is a quest for confidence. They don't care how many times they fall. They will continue. There's nobody standing there with a checklist saying, well, you didn't pass that standard. So you need to just go sit down over there. You can't walk. They're going to keep at it. They come to us having mastered an entire language with no instruction from us. So they already come with knowledge. And I think sometimes we treat them as if they don't have anything. So I think more kids appreciate the fact that you ask the question, tell me about this, explain this to me. And they understand that the classroom is a place where we're going to share information and knowledge. We're going to learn together. So. Okay.
Yeah.
You got one.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. First of all,
You're
it
welcome.
was really inspiring. So I am a German student studying to be a teacher of English as a foreign language, of course. And like one of our German core curriculum's stated goals is to teach cultural competence, not just linguistic skills. So, but what I am taught, I don't want to criticize my teachers too much, but somehow I am still lacking like some concrete examples. They always tell us like, yeah, of course, it's great if you like include movies or authentic materials like music or whatever, like graffitis, of course, as well. But, and they also tell us like, it must be authentic, it should relate to the students. So hip hop culture, of course, comes to my mind as well. But could you maybe like give me an example of like 3 things I could like take from, for example, a hip hop song that I can teach to my students, like besides just having them analyze the lyrics and learn the language. And my teachers always tell me like, oh yeah, they'll get the culture, you know, just by learning about the song, but that's not how it works. Like, how can I like really get the students in touch with that, like a different culture through, for example, lyrics?
So let me make sure I understand where you are. You are teaching German students English?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because Germany is, of course, one of the most diverse nations in Europe, right? So the fundamental question is, who is a German? And I
I feel like this doesn't really matter to, like, the teaching of another culture. I mean, most of the students already will be aware or should be aware by the time I'm teaching them of what culture they bring into the classroom. But my challenge is to show them another one.
Okay, but you always start where people are. So one of the places where they are is that there's a very vibrant hip hop scene in Germany. So you begin starting with there, and then you look at the parallels. What are they doing in Germany with hip hop that lines up with something that we're doing here? Issues of immigration are big in Germany right now. So a lot of the hip hop artists from Germany speak to that. Even the whole, the rise of the right, you know, in Germany is like paranoid about, because of its history, that there is this sort of rise of Nazism and ultra-right movements. Well, we have a parallel in the US. So again, a lot of times, the home culture becomes the bridge to understanding another culture. You have to have a conceptual scheme to put something in. If you've never seen something, you don't know what to make of it. So I think that there's some powerful stuff happening in Germany and throughout Europe, actually, in youth culture that you can begin to pull on. Most of our kids are what I would call global teenagers. I do an activity with students in which I put them in a circle and I ask them to look in the label of the person in front of them and look at where it says that item was made. And then we do a whole map of where our clothing is from. Turns out most of it is not made in the US. So now we have a whole other conversation about why are we getting so many things from Pakistan and Thailand and Vietnam, and what does that mean? And we get to talk about the exploitation of workers. And so just by looking at each other's labels, so I think there's a lot of wonderful parallels you can make between what is happening in their culture so that they can understand that new culture they're trying to learn. And have them come to Wisconsin. 55% of the people from Wisconsin are of German ancestry. We have a German day on our campus, and we bring all the German students, high school students studying German. There's over 1,000 kids. I'm like, this many people studying German? But if you know the history of bilingual education in this country, the Germans were among the first group of people who demanded schooling in German language. So there's wonderful parallels because it's hard to make sense of something for which you don't have an analog, for which it's so new it doesn't fit anything. So I would start with some of the stuff they are very familiar with and show how it bridges to other things. I work with kids who are first generation applying to college, and we start with a song by Kool Moe Dee, mainly because I'm a 90s hip hop head, you know. You can't sell me on no panda, 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 no. But in that song, Kool Moe Dee is called I Go to Work, and I use his boast throughout the lyrics as a way to think about writing that essay to college, really talking up yourself. So you're looking for just analogs and bridges throughout.
Thank you.
Did we just finish this?
Hi. Over here.
Okay.
Thank you for coming. I'm an education major here at Bowdoin, and we shadow in schools every Friday. So tomorrow I'll be going to a school that has a super strict cell phone policy. And for that reason, I was really intrigued when you were alarmed by the no cell phone rule. And I'm just curious if there is a way to leverage smartphones in the classroom or in schooling, or if you more mean it's like just on social media, or the way that students are presented with information and kind of what role that technology can play without being distracting.
Yeah, obviously my feelings about the use of cell phones is very different from a lot of people. And it's because I am convinced that the kids are actually smarter than we are. And all of these rules we keep making up, they figure out ways to subvert them anyway. I did a workshop for some teachers in the Dallas Independent School District. And that's why I now embed all of my videos. I couldn't go to YouTube because the school had it blocked. The district blocks it. But what was funny is when I'm struggling to get my video up, and this little sophomore says to me, "You trying to get to YouTube?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got a cell phone?" and he took my cell phone, hooked up. He said, "You good, you can put it up." So a 15-year-old understands better than the so-called adults about these technologies. And when you make them forbidden fruit, that's what makes them distracting. I wouldn't dream of telling college students that they had to put all of their cell phones in a bag. We don't live in the safest of environments. If I was a parent in the Parkland School District at Marjorie Stoneham and saw on the news that there was an active shooter, I want my child to text me and say, "I'm okay." So I think it's the forbiddenness. And how do you help kids learn how to do something appropriately? I mean, it's kind of why the cafeteria is a horrible place, because we don't teach them how to sit down and have a conversation with conversational. They're going to spend the rest of their life dining in public. But yet, you know, we want a set of rules that say you can't talk or you can't. So I think we go about a lot of these things the wrong way. I know that people don't agree with me on this, but I'm convinced that keeping the cell phones away from them ain't keeping them away from the distractions that they want. They'll find something else to be distracting. Why not engage the cell phone? Why not have students, you know, I have a smart board in my classroom, and I have a Twitter feed. So the whole time that I'm lecturing or we're doing some activity, there are tweets going up about what we're doing. Because I have some students, particularly international students, who raising their hand and speaking aloud is just not a part of what they've learned, but they are engaged and they want to participate, but they can tweet something. So I think we should stop fighting the technologies, because every time we fought it, we've lost. We fought the television. We said, "Oh, no, 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 we don't want that. They're going to try to make that take the place of the teacher." And as a result of our failure to engage, I think that's the reason why we have so much crap on television. Because educators didn't sit down and say, "Hey, what if we did this? What if we did that?" I mean, we got a couple good shows out of Sesame Street, Electric Company, and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but the general thing is as it is a vast wasteland, because we fought it. Computers came along, we didn't want those in the classroom. Oh no, they're gonna try to take the place of the teacher. The original educational software that got produced out of Oregon and California is horrible. If you've ever seen Oregon trails, that's the worst thing that anybody ever came up with. It's racist, but those people are not educators. They know how to make something work. They're software engineers. So every time we fight the technology, we lose. So my sense is that we should be engaging them. We should be using, you know, we get to cell phones to the point where the kids go, "Oh gosh, we gotta use our cell phones again?" Right? I have my undergraduates give me a tweet on the articles I assign them. They can do it in 140 characters, they knock it out, right? So they're not constantly trying to do other things. So I know I'm in the minority on this, but I just disagree with it. I think the technologies are always going to be here. They're going to always be improving. They're going to get smaller. You know, will we know it when the kids actually had the technology in there? You know, we have one iteration of Google Glasses, but you know, there'll be another one, and we think the kids are paying attention and they watching the playoffs, right? So we're just not smarter than them. We're not. And I just think it's wrong for us to keep fighting those things that are part of their everyday lives.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Let's have 3 more questions.
Okay, so we got one coming here.
Well, I'd like to thank you very, very much for coming
You're
this
welcome.
evening. As a member of the Brodie family, I really appreciate it. It was
Thank
a
you.
wonderful lecture. I am a principal in the state of Vermont, and I don't think you need to watch Saturday Night Live to know that Vermont has very little racial diversity. But we do have diversity. We have diversity, religious diversity, economic diversity. We have considerable diversity in education and diversity in family structures. And you referenced that when you were talking about being in, I think you said LA, that you had gone into the families. You knew those families because you'd been in their houses. And what we find is that one of the critical aspects of knowing those little kindergartners as they come in is to know their families and to maybe actually be in their homes. How do education programs today prepare students so that, students of education, to really accept that, to know, to teach with true cultural responsiveness, that you need to also know the child's culture, not just their race, not just their religion, but to really know their family culture.
Right. So this is one of those tricky kinds of things, because the truth of the matter is everybody doesn't want you in their home. Some people think you're there to judge them. They want to know, they think you're there counting how many books you have and is your house neat. And so I've always had this policy is I would love to visit with you. Would you be, in which ways would you be most amenable? Would you like to come to school? Would you like me to come to your home? Would you like to meet in a more neutral place like the library or McDonald's? And I've had many conferences with parents in McDonald's. So that's, I think, one of the first things that we have to recognize is that everybody doesn't want you in their home. I think the other thing that I really learned from studying these teachers was the fact that they found ways to insert themselves into the culture that were what I would call unobtrusive. So one of the teachers, for example, used to go to Little League practices. She said, I won't go to the game because it's too much stress. If you don't get in or you make an error, then your teacher's sitting there and oh my God, But she says, at a practice, I can see how this youngster works with other adults, how they learn to give and take. I had another teacher who said, I kind of just go around to different church services. I don't announce that I'm coming. I just show up at a church service. And kids are excited. That's my teacher. That's my teacher. Now, when I moved to Wisconsin, I was struck because the librarian at one of the local schools would come to my church once a month. She wasn't of the same background and culture, but she had established with the pastor that once a month she would come and share a book. This is a new book that's in our library. What I found when I went into the school is that she had virtually no problems interacting with kids because they recognized her as kind of a fixture in the community. So I think there's a variety of ways that we get to know people, not just in their homes, but in their communities and in the things that they like to do. One other example is one of the teachers in the study said, we have these career days, and we bring all these high-powered people here, and the kids are like, this is, how am I going to get to be an astronaut? They just can't see it. So she started doing what she called internships in her classroom. And so she would pair her students with a more commonly, a job that kids saw. So the first internship was always with the school janitor. So she puts 2 kids with them, and if he has to be in at 6 a.m., they have to be in at 6 a.m. If he works through the evening, they work through the evening. And they just get to talk with him, they interview him, they do what he does. And she says, now one of the things that happens is the kids come back with deep respect for the janitor because, custodians have better union negotiating skills than teachers, so their salaries are not bad, they're teamsters, they got this thing down. As the teachers don't know what they're doing at the negotiating table. But the other thing, she said, they begin to appreciate the work. So you have kids saying, hey, get that up off the floor. People have to clean that up. They begin to see how much work is involved with this. But she also brings their parents and the work their parents do, because I think a lot of times kids, particularly kids who are poor, don't think their parents are doing anything that contributes. But a bus driver is an important job. And so her concern was that the kids were being less, they didn't value work. And what I mean by that is if you suggested to them, doing a low-skill job like working at McDonald's, they were like, I'm not working at Mickey D's. She would say, who do you think they made these jobs for? They're for kids, they're for young people. And it contributes something. So helping them understand that the school secretary, the janitor, a bus driver, a clerk, a postal worker are all doing work that is important and contributes to the society was something she was trying to build. Not that you can't decide to be an astronaut or a chemical engineer, but literally value the work that is happening in your community, and it's one of the things that keeps your community going and cohesive. So I think there are a variety of ways to engage with families. Bringing the families, one of the teachers would have the mothers come for a Mother's Day breakfast. Very simple breakfast. Cereal, toast, juice. And the kids are so excited. My mom's coming, my grandma's coming, to have that little, handmade placemat and make breakfast. Was a way to connect, not just merely always being punitive towards kids and saying what they can't do, but showing families what they can do. I think there's live, and this is going to be the last question. Okay. Not two more. But one more. I'm sorry for being long-winded. Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here. I'll try to keep my question short. I'm a math and education major, and I was wondering if you could just give like a few examples of ways that you can integrate hip-hop education and or other versions of or modes of culturally sustaining pedagogy into like math and STEM classes, just because I feel like I never saw that growing up. And
So,
yeah.
You really need to come to our hip-hop ed conversations, because the people who started it are STEM people. Chris Emden is a STEM guy, Rensselaer Polytechnic, and he runs something called Science Genius, where kids battle using science concepts. But we went to Marie Curie Middle School, and the kids were, we put them in a circle, which in hip-hop parlance is called a cipher, the people jumping in. And basically we tell them this is what all scientists do. All scientists are in a cipher. It's often a journal. So this one writes something, and then somebody come and clap back at that one, and this one come back. I mean, that's really what we do. So we were in this class, and these kids were doing fractions. And they had to come up with some hip-hop lyrics to really explain fractions. So this one group had a song, and the hook of the song is, but a fraction's just a part of a whole. I said, a fraction's just a part of a whole. A fraction's just a part of a whole. I said, a fraction's just a part of a whole. Well, every time somebody said the word fraction, that particular cipher would go, but a fraction's just a part of a whole. I said, a fraction's just a part of a whole. A fraction's just a part. It's the kind of thing, kids love rhyme and pattern, and mathematics is all about patterns. So it's become one of the more natural places for us to go, because inherently it does the kind of things. When I say to kids, I need you to write me 8 bars, they know what I mean. I was doing a class and I had these kids write these 8 bars, and this, it's funny because they want to write more than 8. I told one brother, I said, I ain't trying to produce you. You don't need to give me 32 bars, okay? I said 8. But there's a way that, really good hip hop has really good rhyme scheme, has good rhythm, it flows, is lyrical, and you can take some examples of hip hop lyrics and say which one is mathematically more, quote, elegant, if you will. But yeah, we have a number of math educators who are doing this work with us, not just our English teachers and our social studies teachers. It's been really the science people, science and math. I did a workshop for STEM teachers in Baton Rouge last winter, and it was right after Black Panther had come out. And I asked them, how many of you have seen Black Panther? Well, everybody's hand was up. And I said, okay, how many of you use Black Panther in your classroom? Nobody. I said, just like you all went, trust me, your kids went to see Black Panther. And so I had them take the acronym, and I don't use STEM, I actually use STEAM, because I think the arts are what hold all of this together. So we took the STEAM acronym and asked them to identify all the science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics they saw in Black Panther. Filled the boards. Then I asked for my chemistry teachers. I said, okay, here's a question for my chemistry teachers. If vibranium was an actual element, where would it fit on a periodic chart of elements? Their minds are, right? Because you got to, the chart, the point of the chart is not to memorize it. The point of the chart is to understand that the elements are organized in a particular way based on their neutrons, electrons, protons. The metals are all together. So where you want to put vibranium, is it metal? Is it, it's not a gas. Is it, how many neutrons, how many protons, how many electrons? And knowing kind of where it would fit on there would help a teacher understand this kid really does understand elements, right? So it's those kinds of things. When you go home, Google Most Deaf's Mathematics. He has a song called Mathematics. Now, I'm going to tell you, you can't use all of that song. Okay. But one of the things that he does with the songs is that he just cites all these statistics and life chances that the kids are up against in various communities. So, no, mathematics is definitely in the game with hip-hop. So I think that was the last one.